Okay, in this video we're going to look at what it means to simplify square roots. Okay, so there's one definition that we need to be aware of when we're talking about simplifying square roots, and that's a perfect square. A perfect square is simply a number whose square root is a whole number. Okay, for example, 25 is a perfect square because the square root of 25 equals 5, and 5 is a whole number. So, warm up, we just want to answer these 4 questions. Okay, we want to identify or find these 4 square roots. Okay, the square root of 49 is asking what number times itself equals 49. Okay, what number multiplied by itself, what number squared equals 49. Okay, so take 10 seconds to try and answer these 4. Okay, the square root of 49 is 7 because 7 times 7 is 49. The square root of 100 is 10 because 10 times 10 is 100. The square root of 36 is 6 because 6 times 6 is 36. Now negative 4, we got to be careful. 2 times 2 is positive 4, and negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. So here we say this is not possible. This is because we cannot take square roots of negative numbers. Okay, we cannot take square roots of negative numbers because 2 times 2 is positive 4 and negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. You can't multiply a number by itself and get a negative number because in order to get a negative number you need one positive and one negative. If you have one positive and one negative, then it's impossible for the number to be multiplied by itself. Alright, so now because the square root of 49 is 7, we say 49 is a perfect square, 100 is a perfect square, 36 is a perfect square. So it's important that we are able to identify, well, what are the first whatever perfect squares. So this is a list that you should memorize or at least be able to think through quickly. We want to know what are the perfect squares. Well, 1's a perfect square because the square root of 1 is 1. Okay, 1 times 1 is 1. Now 2 times 2 is 4, so 4 is a perfect square because the square root of 4 is 2. 3 times 3 is 9, so 9 is a perfect square because the square root of 9 is 3. 4 times 4 is 16, so 16 is a perfect square. The square root of 16 equals 4. And so on. The square root of 25 is 5. The square root of 36 is 6. The square root of 49 is 7. The square root of 64 is 8. And all I'm doing to think through this is 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, 4 squared is 16, 5 squared is 25, 6 squared is 36, 7 squared is 49. That's just how you think through the perfect squares. So then 8 squared is 64, 9 squared is 81, 10 squared is 100, 11 squared is 121, and 12 squared is 144. And that's a good enough list for an 8th grader to have memorized. Okay, these are the first 12 perfect squares. First 12 positive perfect squares. So now we want to look at what does it mean to simplify a square root. So let's look at our first example, the square root of 8. Now, as we can see, 8's not a perfect square. Okay, 1 because it's not in our list, and 2 because no whole number times itself equals 8. 2 times 2 is 4, and 3 times 3 is 9. So we know the square root of 8 is going to be some decimal in between 2 and 3. It might be like 2.8 or 2.9, but we can't really figure it out exactly without a calculator. So we want to be able to say, well, what if we don't have a calculator? What can we do with this square root of 8? Now when we're talking about simplifying a square root, we use one important property of square roots, meaning if you're multiplying 2 square roots together, or you're allowed to multiply 2 square roots together. So we want to know, well, how can we break the square root of 8 up into multiplication so that one of the 2 factors is a perfect square? Well, I know the square root of 8, or 8 equals 4 times 2, and 4 is a perfect square. Okay, so we know the square root of 8 equals the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. And the reason why we do this is because I know what the square root of 4 is. I know the square root of 4 equals 2 because 2 times 2 equals 4. So the square root of 4 is 2, so we don't have the square root anymore. The square root's in operation, and we took the square root, so the square root of 4 equals 2. So this answer is 2 times the square root of 2. And some of you might be saying, this really isn't simpler than the square root of 8, but this is a lot easier to work with. Okay, once we start moving on in the year, when we start having to do operations with square roots, this is easier to work with. This is actually easier to look at. It's easier to understand as you move through the upcoming courses. And this is a very simple process that we're going to learn to help us be more prepared as we move forward in our math lives. So the way we check this is, well, we want to know, did we simplify this correctly? Okay. Is the square root of 8 equal to this 2 times the square root of 2? Because if we did this simplification correctly, we better get the same answer if we type it into our calculator. So 2 times the square root of 2 equals 2.828. And we're just going to remember that number for 2 seconds because we want to know, is that the same thing as the square root of 8? Yeah, we got 2.828. Okay, that's just a way to check your answer, but this is the answer. That's what a simplified square root is. Okay, and this is a weird process, so we're just going to do a couple more together. Okay, this is square root of 24. Okay, the same thing. 24 is not a perfect square because no number times itself equals 24. Okay, we know this is going to be pretty close to, this number is going to be between 4 and 5 because 4 squared is 16 and 5 squared is 25, so this is going to be about 4.8 or 4.9. But we want to be able to simplify it the same way we did here. So we look, what perfect square is a factor of 24? Well, again, it's 4. So I'm going to do the square root of 4 times the square root of 6 because 4 times 6 equals 24. There's a lot of numbers that multiply to get 24, but we only care about the one where one of our factors is a perfect square. Okay, 8 times 3 is 24, 12 times 2 is 24, 24 times 1 is 24. But we don't really care about this one. We care about kind of what's the biggest one that goes into both, or what's the biggest perfect square that goes into 24, and that's 4. Again, the square root of 4 is 2, so this answer is just 2 times the square root of 6. Okay, let's learn how to check our work. So we're going to do 2 times the square root of 6. Okay, this is about 4.9, like we kind of estimated it would be. And we want to see, is this the same as the square root of 24? Yeah, 4.9. Okay, again, this is just a way to check your work, but this is the answer. Okay, let's try another example together. Let's say we want to simplify the square root of 500. Okay, so we look for the biggest perfect square that goes into 500. Now, 4 goes into 500, 25 goes into 500. We want to find what's the biggest one in our list that goes into 500. And we can multiply to get 500, and that's 100. Okay, so we know the square root of 500 is the square root of 100 times the square root of 5. Again, you want to find the biggest perfect square because you want to make these numbers as small as possible, as simple as possible. Okay, then what's the square root of 100? What number times itself equals 100? And that's 10 times the square root of 5. Okay, we're just going to get in good habits. We're going to check our work. 10 times the square root of 5 is 22.36. So you better hope the square root of 500 is 22.36. And it is. So we know we did it right. Okay, so why don't you try this one on your own. So press pause, try it, then press play when you're ready to check your work. Okay, so we want to find the biggest perfect square that goes into 75. Okay, that's 25. So we have the square root of 25 times the square root of 3. Again, we have to do this over multiplication. We do this with multiplication because 25 times 3 is 75. The square root of 25 is 5. So we have 5 times the square root of 3. Good habits. So 5 times the square root of 3 is 8.66. Square root of 75, 8.66. That just means we did it right. And our answer is 5 times the square root of 3. Okay, one more for you, the square root of 98. Okay, so we look for the biggest perfect square. This one's a little bit more difficult, but okay, we do know how to multiply in our heads. I know 49 goes into 98 because 49 times 2 is 98, so this is the square root of 49 times the square root of 2. The square root of 49 is 7 times the square root of 2. It's very important that once you take the square root, you don't have the square root anymore. And if you don't know the square root of this other number, that's why it stays a square root. Okay, for all these examples, we didn't know the square root of 2, so it stayed the square root of 2. We didn't know the square root of 6, so it stayed. We didn't know the square root of 5. We didn't know the square root of 3. We don't know the square root of 2. So it stays like this. So now we just type it in our calculator to check our work. 7 times the square root of 2, about 9.9. Square root of 98, about 9.9. That's the same, so that's our answer. Okay, and this is how we simplify square roots. So for more practice, refer to some of the online resources or the textbook.